Awesome. Welcome, everybody. This is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Villages Work Group. That's a mouthful. I'm so happy to see everybody here. We have a fairly large group of people. And for those of you who joined a little later on, if you are interested and you would like, feel free to enter your name and your village affiliation on the chat box. So we have some records of who participated. There's far too many people joining us that would allow us to do a sort of personalized introduction. The group that is currently convening is kind of a hybrid of two intentions. Montgomery County, Maryland villages have been meeting over a year now, discussing issues that pertain to their work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've collectively defined that as in the most broad sense possible, thinking about concerns around race, language, culture, ability, anything that LGBT issues. So all the issues that village leaders feel is critical for their work is welcome to be a subject of our conversation. So we've been meeting monthly. Sometimes we have speakers and sometimes we just have free discussions, sharing best practices, discussing challenges, collectively figuring out solutions. One of our products has been a toolkit to talk about racism with groups of people who are not particularly oriented to that work. So if anyone is interested in receiving that, let me know, send me an email. I'm going to put my name and email in the chat box shortly. And so for the most part, we've been meeting just for county villages, and there's about 30 of them. So it's a fairly large group to begin with, although not all villages send representative. And we've recently expanded that to the region. So there are people from DC who are joining us, people from Prince George's sometimes, and sometimes from Virginia. And a couple of months ago, I had invited a speaker from King County, Seattle, to talk about the ways that she had started a village in the Khmer community up in King County. Thank you to Tracy Adair for making that connection. I know Tracy, you're with us today. And we felt that this would be an interesting topic that other people might be interested in, and had extended an invitation to additional groups. And those who participated felt like they wanted to be a part of this ongoing diversity, equity, and inclusion group, because there's so much content that can be shared across regions. So this is something that is relevant to everybody in this country. And so the core group that we have been reading monthly, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Montgomery County, felt like they wanted to have some time to discuss things sort of more locally, but that we would open up this meeting for diversity, equity, and inclusion topic to the country every third meeting. So essentially, we're going to keep these going on a quarterly basis. And this is our first formal V2V and other villages partnership meeting. So I know it was a mouth, but I wanted to give context for people who have joined and did not participate previously and didn't know where is this group coming from, what does that mean? And I hope I've given enough context. So for this kind of inaugural V2V / Montgomery County Villages DEI group, I've reached out to an incredible person, Miss Kathy Pointer, who's going to be our guest speaker today. And she's going to talk about her working in the Ward 8 village. I'm sure you've seen her bio and introduction. If you have a Zoom link, that means you've seen the rest of it. So we're not going to spend too much time on that. I want to give Ms. Pointer all the time to talk about her experiences working with diverse communities in Washington, D.C. And my hopes is that we will have a facilitated conversations following her talking points, so that people can not just ask questions, but also share their experiences and potentially some creative solutions they found. Because as we've all seen with many other villages meeting, when you bring village leaders together, the best ideas are generated when people share their experiences. No one has all the solutions in their pocket, but collectively this hive mind yields the best results. So without further ado, I am going to hand over the mic to Ms. Pointer. I don't know if you are off, speaker. Before she starts, please mute yourself so that we don't get any echoes or any problems. And send me a chat if you have any issues. And that's it.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, thank you so very much for this opportunity. I certainly want to thank Pazit for reaching out, and to Barbara, thank you for being a part of this discussion. We've shared a little bit about some of what was shared today. Thank you, Eddie, reached out to me a long time ago just to kind of engage in the whole village collaboration efforts, and I'm really, really appreciative of that. And thank you, Leah. I see you on. Good to see you. Haven't talked to you in a good while. So I was just asked to kind of share about the start of our village and working with communities of color. So if I can share my screen, which I think I have shared screen, I just want to do that right quick. And feeling your existence. On here, yeah. Yourself a ride. Oh, it was up here. Can you see the screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, good. So our village is the Kingdom Care Senior Village. Something's happening here. Okay, here we go. And I put in an extra slide there. So our village is the Kingdom Care Senior Village. And initially, I was not necessarily aware of the village concept at all as a model to support seniors and communities. There was, when I did become aware, there was no village in either Ward 7 or 8, which are two predominantly communities of color, specifically African American. There were about, at that time, I think 11 or others in the DC area, but there was not one that was reaching out to other communities. What I did know was that in the African American community, churches are very vital to connections, to community information sharing, having access to seniors, being a place of safety for seniors, and that kind of thing. So we saw, as I looked at it, I saw the village model as a way to assist seniors. We were already doing some things, but certainly nowhere near the level of what a village does, but I could see the alignment. And because I saw the alignment, I thought that we should do something about that. We didn't have capacity on our own. So at that time, the DC Office on Aging put out an RFP, and they were looking for someone to start a village in an African American community. And again, my background was in grants management. Well, let me say contracts management, proposal writing, administration, management, and all that. So I kind of understood what needed to go into putting that together. But what I did not understand at that time, that the magnitude of the requirement was to service an entire ward. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So we opened, that was in October, probably, I believe, of 2016. And we fast forwarded and we just really got things together, and we opened in March of 17. One of the things I think that's very important, as we all know, is just really kind of understanding the demographics of the community. So for us, the Ward 8 community consisted of about 80,000 people, 92% Black, African American. About 15,000 were 60 years and older, 9,000 females, 6,000 males. But again, at that time, that was not registering in my mind about the magnitude of that. All I was looking at was starting a village because that was the request in Ward 8 of DC. But we soon had our first major challenge, and that was that most villages are confined to specific communities. So I definitely want to say that, to make sure we kind of be aware of that, that we want to kind of, because it is community-based, it's community-driven in that particular area. I didn't know that we were to do a whole ward, which was impossible to do. And then also we're talking about just looking at the demographics. So we had about a 16%, about a 32% poverty rate, which is almost double that of DC. So what that meant for me as it related to membership fees, so really being, mindful of that and the people you're serving, as well as what some of the needs might be that could be different. And in our community, we're in a food desert, so food is a major, major issue, access to food, preparation of food, but certainly access, getting it. In Ward 7, in Ward 8, I mentioned there are about 80,000 people. We have one major grocery store. So that can kind of talk about, again, that issue and how widespread that can be, and just looking at the needs of what the community really needs. In Ward 8, there, again, I said a few minutes ago, really being focused on it. I'm focused more on it now, that there are actually 12 communities in the ward. So just trying to, make sure we're very clear on that. So that also then kind of lends itself to the whole issue of transportation and volunteers, and we just didn't have the resources to support a whole ward. Also, I think that messaging is very important, again, knowing your own limitations and what you can do. So that became very important to us, and really sharing that villages are part of the overall network to support seniors, another viable resource, but realizing we were not the end of all. And I think that sometimes, if we don't have that messaging clear, we're sending a message that we may not be able to live up to. So I just want to, kind of make sure that we kept our messaging clear. So along with other organizations, other agencies like the Department of Aging, we have in our area something called Senior Wellness Centers. We have an initiative, Age Friendly DC. So really got connected with all of these organizations to make sure that we understood and could see our part or the role we could play and how we can work collaboratively to meet the needs of the seniors we were serving. So our strategy was kind of threefold, and I really wanted to just kind of share a little bit about this because I think it's so important. And that is that, number one, we determined to just do what we could do with the resources we had. And that was majorly important for me, to kind of look at what we were able to do within our capacity to do and really focus there. We did not advertise widely at all. Again, I did not want to grow beyond our ability to handle the numbers. Very conscious that there were a lot of seniors, 15,000 or so, that could reach out. And we just could not, we knew we could not in any way support that number of people. So just really, we didn't advertise, and we managed the activities to not exceed, again, ourselves beyond what we could manage, The great thing I think about the working with the kind of from the church perspective that I come from, and I really want to say it's not a church-based organization, it's a community-based organization, but because that was kind of where I was working in my background. But what I knew is that also you have a core base of volunteers. So even our structure was based around that, which helped us a lot because they're used to volunteering. And so it was kind of really a no-brainer to kind of pull people together and say, hey, this is what we're doing. And do you want to be a part of this effort? You can volunteer for seniors and do various things. So that helped us, but it helped us again to kind of maintain and manage how far we exceeded ourselves in terms of the services that we could provide. So number one, we determined to just do what we were able to do with the resources we have. Number two, and again, I want to thank Barbara Sullivan. And I don't know if she likes it or not. I heard some people say she likes this saying, other people say she doesn't like it, so I don't know. But when we opened in March, I went to my first B2B conference in November, and it was in Baltimore. And I was just overwhelmed by all the information and different villages that were coming, the workshops that were given. But Barbara said something that really helped to continue to establish for me that you can develop a village and be your village. Because she made that statement, when you've seen one village, you've seen one village. And I've carried that with me for the past 5 years. And what that said to me is that we did not have to try to model ourselves after others, although there's a basic model and basic structure. We didn't have to try to do what other people were doing. We really had to focus on what the needs were in the community, what the seniors were asking for, what we thought would be most valuable in terms of providing services. And again, focused on the needs of the members, doing what we could do around that. And I think that's important. And that which actually leads me to the third thing is that I resisted the temptation to focus on growth. At that time, I resisted that and focused on services and infrastructure. 5 years later, I still think we're focused on structure, services, but we can now, and we have now start looking at growth, which I'm going to show you some things in a few minutes. But initially, the focus to me cannot be on growth. It has to be on sustaining what you have, confirming and defining your services, adding to those services as you see you can, and then on the infrastructure to help support whatever it is you're trying to do. And I think then the growth will grow out of that if you have that kind of stability. So I think at 5 years, we're just beginning to feel like I can grow some. We just hired someone to do some volunteer management support for us, which we haven't been able to do. And a number of other things we're able to do now, we weren't able to do then, but I feel better prepared now that we're ready to do some of that. But I really think that that's important, just resisting that temptation to do that. And I just believe that if we focus on the needs of a given community, diversity is automatically addressed because you are addressing what the needs are of that particular group. And it doesn't matter who it is. And so you don't even have to kind of start with diversity. You start with what are the needs? And in turn, that comes out of there. And that has been extremely helpful for me. Also, I think just identifying groups within, as we all know, within that community that can help us to do what we do. So for a long period of time, that's what I did, just focused on groups of people, again, age-friendly DC, the other DC villages. And I do want to thank all the EDs for supporting this effort. And as of, we know the last, especially year or two, that whole issue, especially for communities of color, villages of community of color is just one of those things that we're really focused on in the DC area. And I just want to thank all of those who helped us to really kind of place some effort on that and help wrap our arms around it, that we can reach out into other communities. So that's kind of how we started. Again, some of our challenges were making sure, again, we could meet the needs of those in our community, not growing beyond our capacity, and just making sure that we're connected with other resources, because we again realize that the village to me is not the all in all, but it's certainly a viable resource. And what we've been able to share to DC government, which has been a great thing for us in DC, is that we are part of the city's hands and arms out into communities of seniors. We touch seniors that many of them do not touch, and that partnership has been great for the DC villages that we've been able to do that. So I think you know that's really helpful. So I was asked to kind of address some of my insights. I think those are some of the things. I don't want this to be too long. Some of the challenges I think I've talked about. My experience has been, I think, a very positive experience because what I found, and I'm going to show you some data in a few minutes, that the services are needed and the services are wanted, but the access has not been there. Even to the point, I think I started by saying I was not even aware of the village model, but in the last 5 years, I've been really talking about it at different meetings, at different community meetings and different forums, been invited to a number of different community organizations to really talk about, you know, hey, this village model and how it can really, really help support seniors to age in place. And it's it's been very welcomed. And I'm really, really excited about that and to be very proud. One of the things you asked me to talk about is to mention what I'm proud of. And that is to really be a voice in the community, letting people know that this village concept is a major resource to help seniors age in place. And I think we all know, especially now in COVID, we want to, make sure people can stay in their homes as long as reasonably possible. So that's kind of the overview of how we started. I would like to just share this new project that we're working on. If I have 5 or 6 minutes, Pazit, do I have that? So we are working on a new project. As I said, I feel now that we have a little bit more stability. We have a little bit few more resources that we can do a little bit more. And it's always been a part of my thought process at some point, how do we share the village model, the village concept with more communities of color? How do we do that? I know that villages are not going to just pop up in these communities because it takes time, it takes money, it takes people, planning, all of that. And I've heard that many villages are in the 1 to 3 year planning phase. As I said, we started in about 6 months, but that's unusual, I think. We had to because we had to get the grant in, and they were required that we start quickly. So we had to make sure that happened. But you need the time to really plan. So even though we quote unquote started, it still has taken us 5 years to really get what I would say our footing to be able to really feel that we have some stability. And so what we've done now is begin to think about how can we reach other communities of color. So we have launched what we're calling Age in Place DC, Senior Services Pilot Project, and identified the problem as the lack of awareness, diversity, and access to villages for people of color. And that's wrong, it should be worship. Oh my gosh. Did it go away? Sorry about that. Where was I? I did something. Let me go back. Okay, there we what we did, we reached out to about 26 houses of worship in the city and started conversations with them last spring. And fast forwarding over a period of a couple of months, we kind of narrowed that down to 8 that we're working with. And the purpose is, again, to provide information about villages, but also to connect seniors to village-like services, to connect seniors to an existing village if there's one in the neighborhood that they live in, because they could be attending a place of worship that's not in the location they reside in. So we want to make sure that connection is made, and then connect seniors to city-provided services, which some of them are not getting. It's an 8-month pilot, January through August. And I just want to share real quickly, if I may, just some data that we've collected over the last 3 months, which I think is very important data to kind of share what the results have been. So again, we're working with 8 houses of worship, and over the 8-month period, we have them to complete a monthly report every month, just so we can get a sense of what they're doing, some of the data, some of the things that are being collected. And what we're asking them, number one, we're asking them is how many seniors were supported during a given month. We've been doing this for 3 months, January, February, and March. For the month of January, we touched 85 seniors. For the month of February, we touched 111 seniors. And for the month of March, we touched 89 seniors. And I'm sorry, 98 seniors. So 85, 111, and 98, each of these 3 months that we've been doing this project. We also asked them on the report, what services are they providing? And we have a list of services they can choose from, because we're just trying to get an idea of what are some of the needs. So we can see here, technology assistance, check-in calls and visits, wellness support, transportation, prepared foods, grocery. We have a program here in DC called Safe at Home, and that's where we can connect seniors with a DC funded program that will help them to do railings in their bathroom, toilet lifts, stair lifts, things like that to make their home safe. 5 Wishes planning, masks, food, just all types of things. So they're able to let us know, and we use that then, and we're going to use the data. We're not using it right now, but we're definitely taking note and we're compiling the data. But the whole goal is to present this to the Department of Aging and Community Living, so we can kind of expand on the program and making sure that some of these needs are being met in the community. We also asked them what additional resources do they need that will be helpful, because again, we realize that there's some things that we are not offering. And then one thing that came up was the connection with the Department of Behavioral Health, because we found that there are a lot of mental health issues sometimes among seniors in some of our communities, and they're going unaddressed. So we are addressing that, and we've already communicated that to the Department on Aging and Community Living to help us to make that connection. Again, we asked them also, how many villages have you connected seniors to? This one I really want to focus here too. We asked them, we also a part of this process, we realized early on, I realized when we were preparing the project and really kind of thinking it through, that there would be services that we would be unable to meet. We're not social workers. We're not certainly not doctors or anything in the medical field, but we felt that at least what we could do is connect the senior to get the service. So we created a referral form, and we worked with the Department of Aging and Community Living to connect with them, that we can send them our referrals, and they have case managers in-house. So for the months of January, February, March, and January, we submitted 10 referrals. In February, we submitted 26, and in March, we submitted 17. So that's 53 referrals that we have sent to have some additional help and some additional support. So I just really wanted to kind of share that with you. We've gotten a lot of feedback from those who are leading these efforts in each of the churches, and I neglected to say this, in each of those, we have what we call an ambassador, and they're responsible for just being the point. They're responsible for completing the monthly report. They're responsible for getting out into the communities. They're responsible for getting their own volunteers to help provide the services and all of that. So it's been a very, very great past 3 months. Surprised, but not. But certainly I'm happy that we'll be able to get these seniors and get them connected so they can get the services that they need. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an incredible presentation. I feel like I still need to process some of the information you've given us. And I know I have some questions, but what we're going to do is this. I see Carlene has a hand up. I also saw a couple of questions in the chat. So might I suggest a process where if you want to ask your question, raise your hand. If you feel you want to put it in the chat, that's okay as well. I'll try to alternate my view on both of these things and also ask my questions as well. So let's start with Carlene. Go ahead, just unmute yourself.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. My apologies. You can't see me, but you don't want to see me right now. My name is Carlene Davis, and I'm in Los Angeles, California. I am co-founder of Sisters Aging with Grace and Elegance and a board member on Village Movement California. Ms. Pointer, thank you so much. I have been loosely following you for about 4 or 5 years. And so it's so wonderful to be able to hear from you today. My question, we are, thinking about exploring the residents of a African-American centered village in Los Angeles, in the area where I live. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the feasibility of the village model that does not necessarily stem from a faith-based leadership that's inclusive, but is also broader. And so based on your experience, if you had any.
I really tried to stress that although, we kind of started out of a church, that was only because that's where I had access to space, volunteers, other resources. So I really try to separate that because it's the community that matters. And I think if you're doing what you're saying you're doing, it will work. One of the things I think we had to do was to just, when we talked about the village concept, bring it home where it's understood that it's a service. It's a service and what you're going to be providing. And I think that that's really the key, is when you're clear. I talked about that on messaging. When you're clear about what you're doing, what your messaging is, what you're attempting to do, that's, to me, those are the nuts and bolts of it. So I try to, because sometimes it does get kind of muddled a little bit, but it's not focused on the faith-based concept, although I use some of the resources there, but not the whole concept of why we're doing what we're doing and who we're serving.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sure.
I see your hand, Morgan. I want to give a chance to those who asked the question in the chat. There was one question for you around how big is Ward 8? And so Eddie had said it's approximately 80 square miles. Do you have a sense of how many people are served in that ward, so people have a sense of the size of the community?
Well, and that was what I tried to share in one of my slides. The ward itself is like 80,000 people, 15,000 seniors.
Yep.
And your question is the question, how many are we serving of those 15,000?
I think it was just the scope of the community that you were intending, your target size. Yeah, it's pretty large. It's
pretty large. And as I said, too, there are 12 different communities in the ward. So that also, again, became very clear, but that was only after we had gotten our funding. So I had to really kind of make sure that was clear to everybody that I was working with, that there's no way we could service the whole ward. And so we just service those we can within the ward.
Yeah, I think most villages would probably, that strategy would resonate with most villages. Another question that came up is, when you're talking about your outreach, do you reach into other DC villages area for those purpose of the check-ins that you had mentioned in the recent study?
We don't. The recent study, we are working with 8, and they're in different wards in the city, but they're specifically in African-American communities.
Okay.
And most of them, although they may have access to a village, are not aware of the village. But we don't deliberately, even when we're just doing regular, working with seniors, we respect those boundaries of other villages. And for us, we are pretty far away from most of them, except for one, which is Capitol Hill Village. But we work closely together to service a ward that we both kind of boundary.
Okay. Morgan Gopnik, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, Kathy. I'm the president of Northwest Neighbors Village, so we're neighbors. Yes. My question was, how do you match sort of the volunteer availability, even in this test project, with where the people are? So if you want to give someone a ride, someone who's off in a different place, you're probably not going to be able to get them a ride. So how do you do that match between where the volunteers are, getting more volunteers, and serving people where they are?
One thing I had pulled up to share is that we did a memo of understanding with each of those 8 houses of worship which have an ambassador. One of their requirements is to identify volunteers, so that we have just what you're saying, volunteers in those specific areas, because we wouldn't be able to, as you're saying, and raise and be able to send in volunteer from our area to go out to all these places. So they are to identify volunteers to be a part of the volunteer base.
Does that answer your question, Morgan? Gretchen Jennings is asking, are any places of worship you targeted in Ward 3 in DC?
3 and 5 are the only 2 we don't have. And I sent out an email on Monday and this morning trying to get funding. We had to cover 3 and 5, but every other ward we have covered in the pilot project except for 3 and 5.
Hi, thanks. This is Gretchen that I asked the question. One of the concerns I think that those of us who are in Ward 3 have is that we know that there are people of color in Ward 3, but our village is very, very white, to be perfectly blunt. And we really are trying to figure out ways of contacting people who do need our services and expanding them. And we thought of houses of worship, but we weren't sure about them in that area. So if you have any suggestions, if not houses of worship, other kinds of community organizations in Ward 3 that could get the word to people of color in Ward 3, we would really appreciate that.
Absolutely, certainly. And I have Ward 3, as I said, and 5 on my radar as well, because we realize the same thing, that there are some people we need to be touching. So Gretchen, I can, if you would send me your information, you and I can chat offline and kind of work on some kind of strategy to make some connection.
I'll actually probably pass that on to, I'm part of a working group, but maybe the chair of the working group, it would be better for the chair or co-chair. So I'll be in touch with you, and that chair could maybe talk with you about anything that you can help us with. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think that this question ties into something that Doug had posted, and I think is very complex and nuanced based on some experience we've had previously. And Doug is asking, as a follow-up to the faith-based question, do you have suggestion for ways to engage faith organization, particularly those that are key in the BIPOC community, in the work of existing villages? So I think Gretchen's questions that Doug touched on, something that villages have been, it's something that they struggle. If your leadership is white and your membership is white, what does that mean for your ability to become a viable, relevant, accessible organizations for other diverse community members in your area? So what's your take on that?
I think it's just having a liaison. I talk with, even with the 13, the other 12 DC villages. A part of this whole process too is to really kind of serve as a bridge to connect the seniors to that village. I think sometimes just talking more with them and the leadership and having that liaison and that bridge that can bring them together, and then they can see, you know, that there are others involved, that this is something that's for them, that you can get engaged in this. And that has helped, I think, a lot, just having that liaison and having that bridge. The other thing that I think helps is, and for me, I also had not just an orientation with these ambassadors, but I had orientations with the senior leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a voice from that perspective, as well as, you know, just a voice of support, and one that, hey, we're in this and you all should connect with it. And that was helpful.
Paul says from Religion Heights, the point that I've just made is what we're concerned about is how to reach, like, without seeming like the people are pandering.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not just about pandering, it's about, if you have any thoughts on the kind of people that villages should find as those bridges. So what it would be your ideal person in terms of that quality or skills or experience that they can be effective in that bridging function? What kind of messaging would you suggest that villages specifically use in their reach to different communities?
Yeah. That's a loaded question, because I absolutely hear the question. I don't know if there's specifically a quote unquote type of person, but I do think that there are people, resources in that community that you should tap into. I can only speak to, you know, our ward in the city, kind of knowing the structure of the city and what's available and who's available. Like for me, I could go to the council member and say, hey, I need you to support this and put this on your site, and have your community engagement person get out here and help me. I need you to show up at my event, you know, and be there and be a voice for it. We're having an open house. Will you attend or send someone? So there are things that I know I can do because of those connections.
Yep.
And I do think, though, as you're saying, though, it certainly has to be people that have some influence, and people would be open to, you know, listening. The other thing I think that has been very helpful is the collaboration between the villages. I don't think that there's kind of a substitute for that. I think that when you come together, as you all are doing, and you know, really put your minds together about how to approach some of these challenges, and, you know, get people on board with you, I just think that that's so vital.
People are, I'm seeing people are in agreement to what you think you've said. I have an observation I want to get your input on. I think Tracy Adair from King County might be able to chime in as well. When we think about equity, many of the middle class or upper middle class communities seem to be able to launch a village without much external funding and support. But when you put those equity lens, it seems as though for successful initiatives, you do need external funding from formal structures. Does that resonate with you? Do you think that's a good, fair statement? And if so, would you mind stating some numbers for us to get a sense of how much money we're talking about?
Absolutely. We wouldn't have been able to do it without funding from the DC Department on Aging. Because if we're looking at, even from the membership fee perspective, you know, our membership was $10. You know, so I think that just speaks to, again, looking at ability to pay for the service.
Yep.
Or to pay a membership fee. And we do have a $20 membership fee, but that's still so nominal when you're talking about trying to have funds to run an organization. That's just not going to happen. It's just not feasible. So it's certainly something you have to look at is additional resources in terms of how, you know, to do that. When we started the village, I think our initial grant, I want to say it was $75,000. And that was to do all of the branding, the initial staffing, all the processes, procedures, software, you know, all the things that we needed. And we only had 9 months. So that's what we started with to kind of launch the village. But without that, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And do it successfully, that we again had some kind of launching pad of infrastructure. We just wouldn't have been able to do it. So I do agree that that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying earlier too, the reason I thought about this model of using ambassadors in these other places. They already have some brick and mortar somewhere. They're already connected to a community. There's already some kind of volunteer base. Yeah. And they can provide village-like services, because to think that villages are just going to pop up in these areas, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So Judith, I see your hand, but I want to give Tracy a chance to chime in because it will be in the same vein of a conversation, and we'll get back to you. Okay. I thank you for bearing with me. So Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you so much, and apologies for stepping in, but I am, Ms. Pointer, I'm just so astounded by the number that you reached out, like the infrastructure number you just gave is pretty small and reasonable. And the fact that you put together and actually had a village after that 75,000 within 6 months is kind of astounding to me. And we're learning here in King County with the funding that we're giving to intentionally support culturally based communities in that village-like concept. I love the fact that you use that. So I just wonder what how you went from that 75,000 to actual a village in 6 months. And was it, you just had the magic to step in at the right moment? You were able to channel an unmet need in the community. I don't know if you have any words
Yeah.
to your.
I think some of it was a combination of things. I'm volunteer, and I didn't say that. So I'm a volunteer, so I'm not a paid ED. Also, I decided to use our funding to address some of the needs in terms of, again, our branding, which I thought was important, getting all of our processes in place, going to V2V, you know, really just kind of getting those things in place. So for people, I stipend a project coordinator. I stipend an activities coordinator. And the beauty, again, working with the houses of worship is because they're used to being volunteers. So to get anything was a great thing for them because they weren't expecting it, nor are they looking for it necessarily. So I used our funding. I got my finance person, our admin person, our graphics and marketing design person, the activity coordinator, and the project kind of coordinator I used our funding to stipend them, which
Wow.
helped to, again, stretch the dollar. So I'm not paying anybody full time at all. And the stipends are nominal, let me say that. But I just think that just looking at ways, again, to stretch the dollars to make sure we were able to get a good footing.
Thank you.
pretty
Appreciate
amazing.
that. But the fact, again, I'm still astounded just from this, that you actually got folks in there and people participating and saying, I'm a
Yes.
village member and I'm a part of
Yes.
this within that 6 months. And then
Yes, we did.
that's astounding. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Judith Byron, go ahead.
I'm not sure how this is going to end up as a question, other than I just wanted to speak and thank Kathy that we just here at Mount Pleasant Village feel in the thick of it all with her, and so welcome the sense of your program with the sense of we're all struggling through this together. I mean, it just feels like a long haul. The village here is 7 years old, and it pretty much started by white people who lived in Mount Pleasant for years and years, but they were friends. And so it was a real decision to move from appearing like a club of higher economic income people and how to be part of the larger community. And then we've been dramatically hit with high level gentrification. So what was a Black dominant neighborhood, we miss Black people here, but it's now predominant. There are a lot of Latinos, and so we deal with language difficulties, and so for us, I just sort of like add as a tip too, but just to share that we're learning it's really long term, and if nothing else, we can put ourselves out in the community and show we're good people to turn to, even if you didn't want to be a member. And that we're finding, along with what Kathy's pointed out about the churches, is really, if we go out and support institutions, like really work deeply with the public school in our neighborhood and the local library, that's places where people from all incomes gather. And so it's, families and children, but those are also parents. So if we prove our good worth, people will start to trust us, and maybe somebody's grandmother we can help out sometime, and we try to do things on the street. But I think the biggest lesson for us is that really it's a long haul, and it's about proving our legacy to the community and breaking through stereotypes that we're not just, because I am not the rich white people, and that we see each other and creating a sense of mutuality, but boy is it a big learning curve. Earnestness just doesn't do the job.
Thank you.
Charlotte, you've written a long statement, but I would rather, if you wouldn't mind, just speaking it out yourself, if you want to unmute yourself and tell us about Village Women California's work.
Yeah, I'll be brief, because there's so much that you all are saying and I'm learning. But California is like a few other places, New York, probably DC, maybe some areas of Texas, where we have a very, very racially and ethnically diverse population. And we have a very, within our consciousness in the state government, local government, just everywhere around diversity, equity, inclusion, racial justice. And when we were included in our state's master plan for aging, there was a challenge to us to reflect the strengths of California's diverse communities. So we see that in California, the village movement will only be viable and sustainable if we reflect the fact that the majority of older adults will be people of color in 2030. So one of the small things that we're doing is creating a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Training Institute to begin to bring leaders of villages together to really talk about exactly what we're talking about today. Judith, I really love what you talked about in terms of authentic relationship building and really being there for people. That's something that white people usually don't do. We usually drop in and leave. So we're going to be doing that. And Kathy, everything that you're saying is so encouraging. And we will be sharing our progress. And we are members of Village to Village Network. I work with Pazit every day or every week. And so we're all learning together. And I'm looking forward to being part of the national learning community. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Peter Ramsey, you messaged me directly, but I think it's a really good question and one that is extremely painful and complex, but I'm going to ask it anyway in the few minutes we have left. Gentrification and rising housing prices. How have you addressed these challenges?
Yeah, it is a major one. And anyone familiar with DC know that it's kind of, I don't even know if there are going to be answers to it.
Yeah.
We've been talking certainly with the mayor and our council members and really trying to address that as relates to seniors and senior housing. And, you know, how do we address that, keeping seniors in their homes? It's just a major issue. We have not found it to impact the village as much. And I think for us, because we're not centered on any one community, so our members are kind of scattered out in Ward 8. So it hasn't been kind of isolated as a problem, or hasn't come to the surface as a problem. So we have not had to deal with it necessarily from the village perspective, although we do know, and we're in conversations, we're attending meetings. I'm just trying to be aware of what's going on in our neighborhoods, but we have not had to address it perceived as a problem for us right now.
If I want to just chime in here, I think that what we've observed in Montgomery County to have impact is collective action for legislation and advocacy. And I'm
Right.
happy Eddie's here because he's been in the forefront of creating, developing agenda for public policy, finding effective ways to send the message. And what we found is that when people speak in the voices of we are representing these many villages or this community, that legislation tends to be considered favorably. And I want to, in this opportunity, there are lots of DC villages here. And perhaps there are ways that you, as a community of older adults for the entire DC area, could have a legislative agenda with DC Council to say, here's some actionable items that you could consider to help people age at home or just address gentrification for the old adults population. Because I think that there is incredible power in the village movement in making changes in their communities, not just to benefit individuals, but also communities at large.
Absolutely. And we certainly use that avenue in some other areas. We just haven't done it as villages for housing, but certainly I'll take that back to our group.
Yeah, we all have lots of on our agenda.
Right.
So there's 2 more minutes for this. I'm not seeing any other questions pop up. I hope I haven't missed anybody. So this is your opportunity to ask Ms. Pointer questions or bring any other concerns. And if not, I'm going to just give people some more context to what's our next steps. So this session has been recorded. We will provide a YouTube link to anyone that is interested. So if you haven't put your name and email in the chat, this could be a good incentive for you to do so you can get the recorded session and perhaps share with colleagues, friends, people you think who might be interested in listening this, and you might want to hear it again to just maybe follow up on certain components of the discussion. Since this is going to be a quarterly session, we are going to send out announcement for the next meeting in July, I'm guessing. I don't know what's going to be the content because that's like in a long time from now. If you have ideas or suggestions, I'm happy to hear your thoughts. So Barbara from V2V would send message to everybody. Montgomery County Villages, we will reconvene back in May. I'm going to be away for the next couple of weeks, so that's going to be after, not in our regular course of meetings. Terry, go ahead. You wanted to say something before we adjourn.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Did you say that the only way we're going to get the recording is if we put our email in the chat?
Well, it will be easy for me to get that. Barbara can say perhaps she will be able to share the link some other way, but I don't want to misspeak and say, if I don't know who you are, I wouldn't know who to share the link with. But if Barbara can share it with everybody in a blast, so I'm happy to do that.
We'd be happy to. We have our
Okay.
Village Buzz coming out, or the
All right.
forums, or just, an e-blast,
Okay.
find
Then-
social media, throw it on Facebook, whatever. Happy
So
to
you
do
don't have
that.
to- Thank you, Barbara. You don't have to put your email. We'll send it through V2V and I'll send it through our regular DEI email list. If you would like to be informed specifically about the upcoming meeting in the summer, send me an email. I will create an email group specifically for this. Otherwise, you would get the announcement through V2V as you had so far. So we have two options here. Both ways are okay. Thank you, Barbara, for partnering and making this happen from a V2V perspective. Thank you to Ms. Kathy Pointer for an incredible conversation. I do hope that we will continue a conversation, learning from your experiences and from your wisdom, and perhaps we can tap some of your time to generate energies and curiosities in Montgomery County. So I'm apologizing ahead of time that I will harass you some more. Please
No
don't hold it
problem.
against me.
Right,
But
okay.
I think that there's an incredible amount of power in your message, and you can possibly help us in the county in getting some interest generated.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I want to thank everyone. My email is in the chat if you want to connect specifically, but otherwise I want to thank Doug Gaddis from Silver Spring Village for creating this Zoom link and helping us with
Doug.
facilitation. And thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.